So the reading offered earlier has been a favorite of mine for some time because for me, it captures the spirit of self-forgiveness. I was drawn even more to it after learning that the author originally thought that the response could be, I forgive myself and each other. I begin again in love. I'm going to begin today by sharing a deeply personal story that illustrates a situation where self-compassion and self-forgiveness were absolutely essential. In 1957, our family was able to afford a new 57 Ford Fairlane 300. Over the next couple of years, as a teenage driver, I had several accidents requiring considerable repair. One of the deep mishaps was deeply tragic. It was a clear Sunday afternoon, sunny, and a couple of my buddies were out enjoying just riding around town. As they pulled up to the intersection with Highway 54 east of town, I asked them if it was clear to go, and I heard go instead of no. Sped out onto the highway only to see a blur and a loud crash of crumpled metal. I then watched in horror as a Willys station wagon careened right, then left, then right again, and rolled over and over, coming to rest in a field across the ditch. As I ran frantically to the wreckage, I could see an older fellow pinned on the underside of the wreckage. My friends and I, supercharged with adrenaline, managed to roll the vehicle back upright. But it was evident that the effort was futile. Poor man was beyond help. Over the years, I have largely forgotten this sad and tragic event. The newspaper and townsfolk all agreed this was a tragic but forgivable accident. After all, the intersection of Eagle Avenue with Highway 54 was an acute angle and required drivers to look back over their right shoulder in the sun to see whether or not it was clear to pull out onto the highway or cross. Yet for some time after this accident, I felt guilt and remorse. You see, there's a little bit more to this story. At that intersection, it was customary for us guys to squeal the tires as we sped across the intersection towards the college farm. And that's what I intended to do that day. That's why for some time I carried the burden of guilt, knowing that the accident might possibly not have happened if I had been trying to show off for my buddies. Today, I still feel regret for the loss of life, but not guilt. You see, sometime over the years, I have forgiven that rash young teenager for his lapse in judgment. In reality, a couple of seconds earlier or later would have resulted in a close call, but no impact and no tragedy. It would seem that what happened was the unlucky confluence of events, just as what happens to us sometimes in our lives is exactly like that. But my telling of this sad chapter in my life is not so much about a tragic accident as it is a reflection of the need to forgive human failings, including and especially one's own. Self-forgiveness and self-compassion are in parts of my story, but I believe they are important consideration in the lives of all of us. It's a widely held principle in the field of human endeavor. In order for one to have compassion for others, it is necessary to give oneself a break. That it is necessary to recognize that we are all fallible human beings, including ourselves. When we cannot or do not internalize this truth, we set ourselves up for not only self-punishment, but unfair condemnation of others. We often characterize such behavior as hypocrisy. An illustration of hypocrisy can be found in the Christian New Testament Bible, in the writings of both Luke and Matthew, where Jesus describes a person who focuses on a speck of sawdust in another's eye while ignoring a chunk of wood in his own eye. He goes on to admonish that the chunk of wood in one's own eye be removed so as to be able to clearly see to remove the speck from their brother's eye. One common interpretation is that we may be blinded by our own failing while claiming to see this same failing in others. However, I think there's also an additional slant that says we may sometimes criticize others for exactly the same fault as we see in ourselves. You often hear the retort, "It takes one to know one." Without getting into too much psychobabble, I wonder if it may be that when we condemn others for behaviors that we ourselves exhibit, we may be looking for validation that what we're doing is not so bad because everyone else does it too. However, I believe that the recognition of our failure to live up to the mark does not need to result in hypocrisy if we are only able to see ourselves as imperfect creatures and to forgive ourselves for our flaws. And in so doing, we become capable of dispensing compassion to ourselves and each other. It seems to me that we humans have a deeply held need to have our transgressions and failings forgiven. But I also think that when we seek forgiveness from others, we are also looking for permission to forgive ourselves. Let me offer a couple of examples to amplify this idea. Take, for example, the Lord's Prayer, familiar to most Christians, and many you use. Consider the part that says, "And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." This line is customarily taken to mean that if we are magnanimous enough to forgive others, then we will be worthy of forgiveness. I think a possible additional interpretation is that if God considers us worthy of forgiveness in spite of all of our transgressions, we should do likewise for both ourselves and others. Then there's the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, where one is encouraged to take the steps that lead first to acknowledge the harm to others that the addiction has caused, then to seek forgiveness for those transgressions, and finally, have a willingness to make amends wherever possible. An essential ingredient of this process is the act of forgiving oneself for at least two important reasons. First, self-forgiveness is the antidote to self-loathing and self-recrimination. And failure to address such destructive behavior very often, leads to relapse. A second and perhaps more important reason why self-forgiveness is necessary than when seeking to make amends, that is so. I hope that wasn't me. Well, if you don't like it, you don't have to shoot me. A second, and I think perhaps even more important reason why self-forgiveness is necessary, that when seeking to make amends, it's possible that some of the offended individuals may be unable to forgive and forget. Now, this situation is certainly less than ideal, while it is, but self-forgiveness allows one to move forward with the assurance that whatever harm was done, it is still forgivable, even though dispensation was not granted. And then there is the practice of asking God to forgive. I think that such requests can be interpreted as acts of self-forgiveness in the following way. If we believe that a loving God thinks enough of us to overlook our human failings, then there's no reason not to think that we are worthy of giving ourselves some slack. Even if I don't believe in any God, I still might ask forgiveness from no one in particular and feel that his has been granted. I really think, if you think about it, that's self-forgiveness in disguise. We observe this phenomenon in modern Unitarian Universalism, even though God may occupy a lesser role in our collective theology. Many of us in our musing and meditation still request forgiveness for our inevitable failure to measure up. In so doing, I believe we are granting dispensation for ourselves. We are forgiving ourselves and each other. And in doing so, we pick ourselves up and begin again in love. And finally, in biblical texts by Matthew and Mark, Jesus was quoted as claiming the second of only two commandments was to love your neighbor as yourself. This is most often taken to mean that you should value others as much as you value yourself. Implicit in this commandment is the assumption that you do indeed love yourself. I would suggest that if I do love myself, then there's little or no need to command me to love others. If I accept that we are all in this together, trying to do our best, but often failing, I will indeed love and forgive myself and others. So for me, these examples show that at its core, self-forgiveness and self-compassion are rooted in the understanding that we are all human, and as such, we are imperfect. Even in spite of our best intentions, we do and say things that are petty, mean, disrespectful, and so on and on. The list is long. Accepting that I am an imperfect human feels like a liberating exercise in humility. And when I'm speaking of humility, I'm certainly not thinking of false modesty or self-deprecation. Realizing that I have worth allows me to see and appreciate the worth of others. When I grant myself dignity and worth, I am able to see it in others. Humility means that while I will often fall short of my best, as will others, we will more often live up to our expectations. Humility means knowing that I am capable of both magnanimity and pettiness, and knowing that the same is true of my fellow travelers in this life. I don't know about you, but I find peace of mind in the recognition that what I share with other human beings is not only the capacity to sink to regrettable lows, but the ability to rise to great heights. And I believe that compassion and self-forgiveness are key components to such satisfaction. So as far as that unfortunate tragic episode in Goodwill, Oklahoma in 1959, I still mourn the loss of that fellow from Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. He didn't deserve to die just trying to get to his destination, but he did die, and there you have it. Still, there is no point in beating up on that teenage version of me. He felt enough regret to last a lifetime. We most certainly forgive him for being a fallible human being. And I believe firmly that that experience provided a seed for my strongly held conviction that self-compassion and self-forgiveness are necessary for a fulfilling life. So I would like to say that I have scaled the mountain of self-compassion and forgiveness. But alas, I still have times when I berate myself for falling short. Just as when I have reached one peak and another, there appears another to overcome. So unfortunately for me, and perhaps for you, it appears that repeated self-forgiveness and constant self-compassion are never-ending lifetime endeavors. So if you, like me, are often too hard on yourself, I invite you, just maybe for today, perhaps just for this hour, to pause to remember that we are all children of this creation, neither perfect nor fatally flawed. You are worthy of love and compassion in spite of your human failings. No, actually, you are worthy of love and compassion because of your human failings. May we celebrate whatever may have rung true in these words. Amen.